The grand halls of the Kryn Empire's palace were made of shining crystal, towering above the rest of the alien city like a monument to their pride. The palace guards, standing tall with sharp, curved weapons, watched the human diplomat with cold, unreadable expressions. To them, he was nothing more than a fragile outsider, unworthy of standing in their great halls. Ambassador Marcus Vale walked forward with calm confidence. He was dressed in a sleek black diplomatic suit, his posture straight, his expression neutral. He had been sent here by the United Terran Alliance, tasked with an impossible mission, negotiating peace between the Kryn Empire and the Torek Dominion, two alien factions locked in an endless war. So far, things weren't looking good. At the far end of the hall sat Princess Silara, the sole heir to the Kryn throne. She was tall, elegant, and intimidating, her deep violet skin glowing under the soft lights of the palace. Her eyes, like polished onyx, studied Marcus with cold curiosity. She had expected a frail diplomat, someone who would bow easily to Kryn superiority. But Marcus didn't bow. He simply stood before her, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. The silence in the chamber was heavy. Finally, Silara spoke. "You are the human diplomat." Her voice was smooth, but there was an edge of amusement in it. Marcus nodded. Ambassador Marcus Vale, representing the United Terran Alliance. Silara's lips curled into something that might have been a smirk. "Your people should have sent a warrior, not a negotiator. This is a war, not a trade dispute." Marcus remained calm. A warrior fights with weapons. A diplomat fights with words. Both can win battles. A few of the Kryn nobles chuckled, clearly entertained by the human's boldness. Silara, however, only watched him, as if trying to figure out what kind of man he truly was. Before she could respond, a sudden movement caught Marcus' eye. One of the royal guards lunged forward, his blade flashing as he charged straight toward Marcus. A test. Any other diplomat would have frozen in fear, but Marcus had spent years in dangerous war zones. His body reacted before his mind had time to process the attack. With a sharp sidestep, Marcus dodged the incoming strike. The guard was fast, but Marcus was faster. In a single swift motion, he grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisted it, and forced the blade out of his hand. With surprising strength, he spun the Kryn guard around and slammed him onto the marble floor. A shocked silence filled the hall. The other guards immediately raised their weapons, but Silara lifted a hand, stopping them. She rose slowly from her throne, her dark eyes locked on Marcus. He straightened his suit, then calmly offered the guard's blade back. "I assume this was part of the greeting ceremony," he said, his voice steady. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in Silara's gaze. Surprise. No human should have been able to disarm a Kryn warrior so easily. The nobles murmured among themselves. The Kryn believed humans to be physically weak, easily intimidated, nothing more than talkers who relied on diplomacy because they could not fight. But this man, he had fought back. Silara took a step closer, observing Marcus like a puzzle she could not solve. "Interesting," she said at last. "Perhaps you are not as fragile as I thought." Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "I don't intend to be." Silara studied him for a moment longer before turning away. "The negotiations begin tomorrow. I expect you to survive until then." Marcus gave a small nod. "I'll do my best." As he left the hall, he could feel the weight of 100 alien eyes on him. The Kryn had expected a weak diplomat. Instead, they had met a human who refused to be afraid. And Princess Silara, for the first time in her life, found herself curious about a human. The air inside the Kryn palace was tense. Even after Ambassador Marcus Vale had left the throne room, the nobles and warriors continued whispering among themselves. No human had ever disarmed a Kryn warrior so easily. It was something unheard of. Impossible, even. Princess Silara sat on her throne, her sharp fingers tapping against the armrest. Her thoughts were troubled, yet she refused to show it. The human had surprised her. He was supposed to be weak. Diplomats were supposed to talk, not fight. And yet, he had moved like a soldier, precise and efficient. She needed to test him further. Marcus walked through the palace corridors, led by a silent Kryn guard. The walls shimmered with glowing inscriptions, ancient words of honor and strength. He had only been on this planet for a few hours, yet he already knew his life was in danger. The Kryn were warriors, proud and aggressive. If they thought he was weak, they would try to eliminate him before negotiations even began. As they reached his temporary chambers, the guard finally spoke. "You made enemies today, human." Marcus turned to him. "And you are?" The guard hesitated before responding. "Commander Tazik, I lead the palace security." Marcus gave him a nod. "Then you should tell your men to stop attacking me before the negotiations even start." Tazik's sharp teeth showed in what might have been a smirk. "The strong survive, the weak fall. You surprised them today, but you will not always be lucky." Marcus sighed. "I don't rely on luck. I rely on skill." Tazik grunted but said nothing more as he left. Marcus entered his chambers, locking the door behind him. The room was luxurious, but had no windows, only a single entrance. A tactical weakness if someone decided to attack him again. He had expected this mission to be difficult, but now he knew it was a death trap. He sat on the edge of his bed, running a hand through his hair. Why had they invited him here if they wanted him dead? He had to find out before it was too late. The next day, a deadly welcome. The negotiations were set to take place in the council chamber, a grand hall with a transparent ceiling that showed the twin suns of Zirath burning bright. The Kryn High Lords sat in a semicircle, their expressions hard and unreadable. Princess Silera stood at the center, her golden armor glistening under the light. Marcus entered the hall with careful steps, aware that every eye was watching him. "Ambassador Vale," Silera greeted, her voice calm but firm. "Today we discuss peace." Marcus nodded. "That is why I am here." Silera tilted her head. "Then let us see if you are worthy." At her signal, a massive Kryn warrior stepped forward. He was nearly 7 feet tall, his muscles like carved stone, his eyes filled with the hunger of battle. The crowd murmured in excitement. Marcus immediately understood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was another test. Silera gestured toward the warrior. "This is General Korak, one of our finest fighters. He will test your strength." Marcus sighed internally. They just wouldn't stop trying to kill him, would they? "And if I refuse?" he asked, his tone even. Silera's lips curved slightly. "Then the talks end here. If you cannot prove your strength, your words mean nothing." The Kryn were a warrior race. To them, only the strong had the right to speak. Marcus had no choice. The fight begins. The council chamber cleared out, forming a wide circle around Marcus and Korak. The general cracked his knuckles, his massive fists like sledgehammers. Marcus had no weapons, only his body and mind, but he had trained in Terran special combat, designed for unarmed self-defense against larger, stronger opponents. Korak charged forward, swinging a powerful punch. Marcus barely dodged, feeling the air shift as the blow nearly took his head off. He couldn't afford to take a single hit. He moved fast, ducking, weaving, staying light on his feet. Korak roared in frustration, attacking again. This time, Marcus redirected the strike, using the Kryn's own momentum to throw him off balance. The alien stumbled slightly, but it wasn't enough. Korak lunged again, this time faster. Marcus had seconds to react. Instead of dodging, he stepped in close, using the Kryn's own weight against him, flipping him over his shoulder. Thudi. The impact shook the chamber. The nobles gasped. A human had just thrown one of their strongest warriors. Korak got up, furious. He grabbed Marcus by the arm, lifting him like a ragdoll. Marcus twisted sharply, breaking free and delivering a solid strike to the Kryn's exposed side. Korak grunted, staggering back. The room was silent. Princess Silara watched, fascinated. This human was no ordinary diplomat. Korak took a deep breath, then laughed. He turned to Silara and pounded his chest in respect. "He fights like a warrior," he declared. "He has earned the right to speak." Silara's eyes flickered with something unreadable. She stepped forward, looking Marcus in the eyes. "Very well, Ambassador Vale. The negotiations will continue." Marcus nodded, breathing steadily. "I appreciate that." He had passed their test. But deep inside, he knew. The real battle was just beginning. The Kryn High Council had never been so silent before. The humiliation of General Korak still hung in the air, a heavy presence that no one dared to acknowledge. A human, a mere diplomat, had defeated one of their strongest warriors. The Kryn were a species that valued strength above all, and now they had to decide if words from such a man were worth listening to. Marcus Vale stood in the center of the chamber, his breath steady despite the fight he had just endured. His suit was slightly wrinkled, but otherwise he looked unshaken. He knew he had only won the first battle. The real challenge, negotiating peace, was still ahead. Princess Silara studied him from her throne, her sharp black eyes unreadable. She was no longer looking at him as a weak diplomat. Now she was truly seeing him. "You have earned the right to speak, human." Her voice was calm, yet something lingered beneath her words. Amusement. Respect. Marcus gave a small nod. "I am here to negotiate a ceasefire between the Kryn Empire and the Tsorek Dominion. Both sides have suffered heavy losses. Continuing this war will only lead to destruction." Some of the Kryn nobles scoffed, shaking their heads. One of them, a towering warrior in golden armor, spoke up. "The Kryn do not surrender. We fight until victory or death." Marcus remained unfazed. "And how many more of your warriors will die before that victory comes? The Tsorek are not weak. They are just as stubborn as you." Silara tilted her head slightly. "You seem to understand our enemies well, Ambassador Vale." Marcus met her gaze. "I understand war, Princess, and I know when both sides have everything to lose." A murmur spread through the chamber. Some of the Kryn leaders were listening now, their expressions no longer just filled with contempt. Marcus had seen this before, the moment when warriors began to realize that victory was not guaranteed. But not everyone was convinced. Suddenly, the doors of the chamber burst open. A Kryn officer stormed inside, his face tense with urgency. He dropped to one knee before the princess and spoke in a hurried voice. "Your Highness, the Tsorek have broken the southern front. Our defenses are failing. The capital could be under siege within days." The room erupted into chaos. Warriors shouted over one another. Nobles slammed their fists against their armrests. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others questioned how their defenses had failed. Silara's calm mask never wavered, but Marcus saw the flicker of concern in her dark eyes. This war was slipping out of their control. Then she turned her gaze back to Marcus. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I suspected it. This war has reached a breaking point. Either you make peace now, or your people will suffer losses they cannot afford." The nobles looked at him in shock. A human was advising them on war. One of the older warriors stood and pointed at him angrily. "You expect us to trust a human to decide the fate of our empire?" Marcus took a step forward. "I expect you to think logically. Your forces are spread too thin. The Tsorek are pushing harder than ever. You may win this war, but at what cost?" Silence fell over the chamber again. The Kryn were not fools. They knew their forces were struggling, but they were warriors, bred for battle, and peace was not their way. Silara sat still, her fingers resting on the hilt of a ceremonial dagger at her side. Then, slowly, she spoke. "You say peace is possible, but the Tsorek have never honored a single treaty. What makes you believe they will listen now?" Marcus took a deep breath, "Because they are desperate too. I can convince them. but I need you to trust me." A long pause followed. Then Silera stood from her throne, stepping down from the raised platform. She walked towards Marcus, her tall figure casting a shadow over him. When she stopped just a few feet away, she studied him closely. "Very well, human. You have one chance." Her voice was softer now, yet firm. "You will travel to the Tsorek warship and speak on behalf of the Kryn Empire. If they refuse your offer, there will be no more talk of peace." The nobles gasped at her words. A human, speaking on behalf of the Kryn. It was unheard of. Marcus met her gaze without hesitation. "Agreed." Silera narrowed her eyes. "You are either very brave or very foolish." Marcus allowed himself a small smirk. "Maybe both." Silera turned to her warriors. "Prepare a ship. The human will leave at once." Marcus knew the risks. The Tsorek could kill him on sight, but he had come here for peace, and he was willing to risk everything to achieve it. As he left the chamber, he could feel Silera's gaze lingering on him, filled with something new, something she had never felt toward a human before. And for the first time in her life, the Kryn princess wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, a human might actually change the fate of her people. The Kryn warship Shadowfang roared to life as it left the palace's docking bay. Its sleek, dark hull blended into the void of space, a silent predator moving toward its prey. Inside, Ambassador Marcus Vale stood in the command chamber, watching the stars blur past. He wasn't alone. Princess Silera had decided to accompany him, much to his surprise. "I cannot let a human represent the Kryn alone," she had said before boarding. "I will witness this negotiation myself." Now she stood beside him, arms crossed, her golden armor gleaming under the ship's dim lighting. She had said little since their departure, and Marcus could tell she was still testing him, still unsure if he was worth trusting. The tension in the chamber was thick. The Kryn warriors on board watched Marcus with suspicion, their hands never far from their weapons. To them, he was still an outsider. Marcus sighed and turned to Silera. "You don't trust me, do you?" She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Trust is earned, not given." Marcus smirked. "And yet, here we are, heading straight into enemy territory together." Silera said nothing. But before Marcus could say more, an urgent alert blared through the ship. One of the Kryn officers turned from the control panel. "We are being hailed by the Tsorek flagship, Your Highness." Silera nodded. "Open the channel." A holographic projection flickered to life in front of them. A towering Tsorek warlord appeared, his crimson-scaled skin gleaming under the light of his warship's bridge. His reptilian eyes narrowed as he saw Marcus standing beside Silera. "Princess Silera," the Tsorek warlord growled, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. "I did not expect the Kryn to send a human as their messenger." Marcus stepped forward before Silera could respond. "You don't have to like it, warlord. You just have to listen." The Tsorek warriors surrounding their leader hissed in displeasure, but the warlord raised a hand, silencing them. "Very well, human. Speak." Marcus took a deep breath. He knew one wrong word could end this meeting before it even began. Both Kryn and Tsorek forces are stretched thin. You have gained ground, but at great cost. If this war continues, it will not end with victory for either side, only destruction. The warlord let out a deep, guttural chuckle. "And what do the Kryn offer in return for peace? A surrender?" Silera's jaw tightened, but she held back her anger. "The Kryn do not surrender," she said coldly. "But we are willing to negotiate fair terms." The warlord studied her for a moment before turning his gaze back to Marcus. "And you, human, what do you gain from this?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I gain nothing. But I refuse to watch two great civilizations tear each other apart when a better way exists." For a long moment, the warlord said nothing. Then he exhaled sharply. "We will consider this, but only if you meet us in person." Silera's eyes widened slightly. That was not part of the arrangement. The warlord's grin widened, showing sharp teeth. then leave, and we will continue our war." Marcus didn't hesitate. "I'll go." Silara whipped her head toward him, disbelief flashing in her eyes. "Are you mad? They will kill you the moment you step on their ship." Marcus met her gaze, calm and steady. "Not if they want peace." The Kryn warriors behind them muttered amongst themselves, uneasy. No Kryn would ever step onto a Tsorak warship alone. It was a death sentence. But here stood a human, willing to risk everything for a chance at peace. The warlord's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Brave words, human. Let us see if you survive them." The hologram flickered off. A tense silence filled the ship. Silara stared at Marcus for a long moment before shaking her head. "You are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." Marcus allowed himself a small smirk. "You said that before." She sighed, crossing her arms. "And yet, I still don't know the answer." A few hours later, Marcus stood at the airlock, preparing to board the Tsorak warship. Silara had ordered a small escort to accompany him, but Marcus refused. "If I go alone, it shows strength," he explained. "If I go with warriors, it shows weakness." Silara scowled. "It also shows stupidity." Marcus chuckled. "I prefer confidence." She sighed, but didn't argue further. Just as Marcus was about to step into the airlock, a Kryn officer rushed forward, his face pale. "Your Highness, there is a traitor among us." Silara's eyes sharpened. "Explain." The officer hesitated. "We intercepted a message. Someone from the palace has been feeding information to the Tsorak." Marcus and Silara exchanged a glance. If the Tsorak had an informant inside the Kryn court, then this meeting might be a trap. Silara clenched her fists. "Who sent the message?" The officer swallowed hard. "One of the High Lords, Lord Vexen." Silara's expression darkened. Lord Vexen was one of the loudest voices against peace. If he had been working with the Tsorak, then this entire war had been manipulated from the start. Marcus exhaled. "We don't have time to deal with him now. The meeting is set." Silara hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful, human." Marcus smiled. "Aren't I always?" She gave him a dry look. "No." With that, Marcus stepped forward and boarded the enemy ship. Little did he know, his greatest test was about to begin. The Tsorak warship, Bloodfang, loomed ahead like a massive beast waiting to devour its prey. Its dark metal hull pulsed with energy, glowing with deep red veins of power. As the docking clamps locked into place, Ambassador Marcus Vale took a deep breath. He was stepping into enemy territory alone. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dark, metallic corridor lined with Tsorak warriors. Their crimson-scaled bodies reflected the dim red lighting, their sharp claws twitching as they watched him. Their reptilian eyes gleamed with suspicion and hunger. Marcus walked forward, calm and composed. Every step he took echoed through the silent hallway. He could feel their stares, their unspoken thoughts. A human. Here, alone, easy prey. But Marcus was no easy prey. At the end of the hallway stood the Tsorak warlord, Varric Thal, his towering form draped in thick armor. His golden eyes narrowed as Marcus approached. "Human," Varric rumbled, his voice deep and rough. "You have courage, I will give you that. But courage means nothing without strength." Marcus stopped a few feet away, keeping his posture straight. "Strength is not just about muscles, warlord. It's about knowing when to fight and when to negotiate." A low growl spread through the warriors surrounding them. The Tsorak respected warriors, not talkers. Varric's lips curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. "Then let's test your words, human. Let's see if you have a warrior's spirit." Before Marcus could respond, one of the Tsorak warriors lunged at him. A fight for respect. Marcus dodged instantly, stepping aside just in time as the warrior's claws sliced through the air where he had been standing. The room erupted in laughter and growls of approval. To them, this was a game, a test of survival. The Zorak warrior attacked again, this time faster. Marcus ducked under a powerful strike, using the momentum to grab the alien's arm and twist it, forcing the warrior off balance. The warrior stumbled but didn't fall. With an enraged hiss, he swung his tail at Marcus. Marcus barely dodged in time, rolling to the side before getting back on his feet. Enough. Varric's voice cut through the air like a blade. The warrior stopped immediately, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. The warlord stepped forward, his golden eyes locked onto Marcus. You fight well, human. Not like a diplomat. Like a soldier. Marcus straightened his suit. I was trained to survive. Varric studied him for a long moment before letting out a deep chuckle. Good. I respect that. The tension in the room eased slightly. The warriors still didn't trust him, but now they respected him. And that was the first step toward negotiation. A dangerous proposal. Varric led Marcus into a war chamber, a circular room filled with holographic battle maps. The Zorak fleet positions, the Kryn defenses, all laid out in bright red and blue projections. Silara had been right. The Zorak were planning something big. Varric gestured toward the map. This war has gone on for too long, but the Kryn will never honor a peace treaty. Marcus shook his head. That's not true. They don't trust you, just as you don't trust them. Someone has been feeding lies to both sides. Varric's expression darkened. You mean the traitor? Marcus nodded. Someone in the Kryn High Court has been working with your people, making sure this war never ends. Varric's claws tapped against the table. And you think the Kryn princess does not know? Marcus hesitated. I think she suspects. But if we don't act now, this war will destroy both your empires. The warlord studied him carefully. Then, with a sharp motion, he deactivated the battle maps. I am willing to listen, human. Marcus exhaled slightly. That was progress. But just as he was about to speak, an alarm blared through the warship. The betrayal unfolds. A Zorak officer rushed in, bowing his head. Warlord, we have an urgent situation. A Kryn fleet is moving toward us. Marcus' eyes widened. That's impossible. Silara wouldn't. Varric growled. She has betrayed you, human. Marcus shook his head. No, this isn't her doing. It's the traitor. The warlord's claws clenched into fists. Then we are walking into a trap. Marcus took a deep breath. We have to stop the battle before it starts. Varric turned to his officers. Ready the fleet, but do not fire unless I command it. He then looked at Marcus. Human, if you are wrong, and this is an attack, I will kill you myself. Marcus nodded. Fair enough. As the ship rushed toward the battlefield, Marcus knew that everything depended on what happened next. And if he failed, there would be no peace. The Zorak warship, Bloodfang, moved swiftly through the darkness of space, heading straight toward the battle zone. The alarm still blared through the ship, and Marcus Vale felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. If this fight broke out, it wouldn't be a small skirmish, it would be total war. The Kryn fleet was approaching fast, their dark silver ships cutting through space like blades. On the other side, the Zorak fleet waited, their red-scaled vessels glowing with charged energy weapons. One wrong move and thousands would die. Warlord Varric stood at the front of the command deck, his golden eyes locked onto the battle map. His massive arms were crossed, but Marcus could see his claws twitching. The warlord was trying to remain calm, but the Zorak were warriors by nature. They didn't hesitate to fight. Marcus turned to him. We need to open a communication channel with Silara. Right now. Varric growled. If she has betrayed you, human, you will be the first to die. Marcus ignored the threat. Just give me the chance to talk. Varric exhaled sharply before giving the order. Open the channel. A few seconds later, Princess Silara's face appeared on the screen. Her dark eyes were sharp, filled with tension. Marcus, she said, her voice steady but urgent. I did not order this fleet to attack. Marcus nodded. I know. It's the traitor, Lord Vexen. Silara's jaw clenched. That coward. He must have sent these ships without my permission. Varric's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. And how do we know you are not lying, Princess? Silara turned her fierce gaze to the warlord. If I wanted war, I wouldn't have sent a human diplomat to negotiate peace. That made Varric pause. Marcus saw his chance. Silara, we need to stop these ships before they fire the first shot. If the Torak think this is a real attack, they'll retaliate with everything they have. Silara nodded. I will send a transmission to recall them. She turned to someone off-screen, giving a sharp order. But before she could say more, an explosion rocked the Bloodfang. The ship shook violently, and warning alarms flashed red across the control panel. What was that? Marcus shouted. A Torak officer checked the sensors, his eyes widening. One of the Kryn ships opened fire. Silence filled the command deck. Varric's expression darkened. That was a mistake. Marcus felt his heart drop as the Torak warriors moved their hands toward their weapons controls. The war was about to start. A desperate gamble. Marcus reacted instantly. He turned to the nearest officer and shouted, "Hold your fire." The officer hesitated, looking at Varric. The warlord's golden eyes burned with fury, his hands gripping the edges of his chair. "This is exactly what the traitor wants," Marcus said urgently. "If you fire back, there will be no stopping the battle." Varric's gaze remained locked on the battle map. The Kryn fleet was still moving, their weapons primed, but Silara was trying to stop them. She reappeared on the screen, her voice filled with frustration. "Vexen's forces are out of my command. They won't listen." Marcus knew what had to be done. "Silara, can you get to them in person?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I will take my ship and go straight to their flagship. If I can get to Vexen, I can put an end to this." Varric's claws tapped against the armrest. "And what do you expect me to do, human? Sit here and wait." Marcus turned to him. "Send out a message to your fleet. Tell them to hold position. Let Silara handle her traitor." Varric's eyes narrowed. "And if she fails?" Marcus sighed. "Then we'll both be dead anyway." Varric let out a low, deep chuckle. "You really are insane, human." Then, after a long moment, he gave the order. "Hold fire. Let's see if the princess can handle her own people." Silara's bold move. Marcus watched as Silara's personal ship raced toward the Kryn fleet. If she failed, Vexen would fully launch an attack. Minutes passed like hours. Then, finally, a new transmission came through. Silara's face appeared, bruised but victorious. "Vexen is dead. His forces are standing down." Marcus exhaled a breath of relief. Varric chuckled. "So the princess has fangs after all." Silara's eyes flickered toward Marcus, a small smirk forming on her lips. "I learned from the best." Marcus shook his head, amused. "I didn't teach you anything." She tilted her head slightly. "You taught me that strength is not just about war, but about knowing when to fight and when to stop." Varric stood from his chair, stepping forward. "Then perhaps it is time we end this war." Marcus felt something shift in the air. For the first time since stepping foot on the Kryn homeworld, he knew peace was no longer just a dream. It was possible. The battle that nearly started never happened. The Kryn fleet, once poised to attack, now stood down. Lord Vexen, the traitor who had secretly worked to keep the war going, was dead. With his influence gone, the Kryn forces finally listened to Princess Silara's command. On the other side, the Torak fleet, though still tense, had held their fire under Warlord Varicthal's orders. It was an uneasy truce, but it was a truce nonetheless. And the one responsible for stopping the war was a human. Marcus Vale sat in the Kryn royal chambers, his body still sore from the previous battles, but his mind sharper than ever. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it had finally arrived. Seated before him were Princess Silara and Warlord Varicthal. both powerful leaders, both once unwilling to even consider peace. Now, they were here to negotiate it. The final negotiation. Hilara spoke first. We have removed the one who sought to sabotage these talks, but trust is not built in a day. Varric nodded, his claws tapping against the armrest. You speak truth, Princess. We have fought for too long. My people will not believe in peace so easily. Marcus leaned forward. That's why we need to make this peace beneficial to both sides. He tapped the control panel, bringing up a holographic map of the contested territories between the Kryn and the Torek, planets that had seen nothing but war for decades. These border systems are the key, Marcus said. Instead of fighting over them, what if we make them neutral zones? Varric's eyes narrowed. Neutral zones? You mean to let them remain unclaimed? Marcus shook his head. Not unclaimed. Shared. Silara raised an eyebrow. Explain. Marcus pointed at one of the planets. Instead of wasting resources fighting over these worlds, let's make them trade hubs. Kryn and Torek colonies working together. You both get the benefits, without the bloodshed. The room was silent. Then Varric let out a deep, rumbling laugh. A bold idea, human. Do you really think our people can work side by side after all this war? Marcus met his gaze. They won't have to trust each other right away, but they will trust results. If trade brings prosperity, warriors become merchants, soldiers become builders. The war ends not because they forget it, but because they find something better. Silara tapped her fingers against the table. This is unconventional. But she was thinking about it. Marcus knew this was their best chance. It will take time, he admitted, but war has taken enough time already. This is the only way forward. Varric exhaled, deep in thought. Then, finally, he nodded. I will agree to this, if the Kryn do. All eyes turned to Silara. She stood, looking at Marcus for a long moment before turning to Varric. I will agree, but if this fails, we will not hesitate to act. Varric grinned. That is what makes you a warrior, Princess. Marcus sighed in relief. The hardest part was over. A warrior's respect. After the meeting, Marcus stepped onto the royal palace balcony, looking out at the sprawling Kryn capital. The sky was painted in shades of purple and gold, the twin suns slowly setting in the distance. He had done it. The war wasn't completely over, but it was ending, and it was because a human had stood where no one else dared to. He heard footsteps behind him. Princess Silara walked up beside him, silent for a moment before speaking. You were right. Marcus smirked. I like the sound of that. Could you say it again? Silara rolled her eyes but allowed herself a small smile. You are impossible, human. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the city below. Then Silara turned to him, her gaze softer than before. I thought humans were weak, that you could not understand war, but you have proven me wrong. Marcus chuckled. Well, I try. She tilted her head. You are more than a diplomat. You have the heart of a warrior. He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. A newfound respect. Silara extended her hand, the Kryn gesture of honor. Marcus took it without hesitation. In that moment, a human and an alien warrior stood as equals, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Epilogue. The legend of the human diplomat. Months later, the first Kryn-Sorak trade colonies were established. The war had ended, not with weapons, but with words. Back on Earth, Marcus became a legend, the human who brokered peace where no one else could. And somewhere across the stars, Princess Silara still remembered the human who had shocked her with his bravery. Perhaps one day their paths would cross again. But for now, humanity had proved itself once more.